Okay, so my name is Daniel Thompson from the wasp-os project, and I'm back at you with another video about the Pine64 PineTime. And we're starting off a little bit differently today, because at the moment what I have here is a sealed device with the factory firmware, the Infinitime firmware that you saw the logo for a moment ago. And I'm going to show you how you can update Infinitime over the air to replace Infinitime with wasp-os, to put wasp-os back and restore Infinitime. And you can also actually use the same tool I'm going to show you with Infinitime to upgrade the MCU bootloader if you're an Infinitime user. So I've been working with JF from the Infinitime team to see how we can get this to work. So I'm going to kick off by connecting to the device. And the very first thing I'm going to do is to kick off a over-the-air upgrade to replace Infinitime with the wasp bootloader, which is this one here. So that will start ticking away and transferring. We can leave that on, it will show you the firmware update. So that's now going to start transferring the wasp bootloader to replace all the firmware that is currently running on the PineTime. And this is because the MCU bootloader that is used with Infinitime and the wasp bootloader are not compatible with each other. You can't boot wasp bootloader applications with MCU boot, and you can't boot MCU boot applications with wasp bootloader. But what we can do is coexist by allowing over-the-air upgrades to switch from one bootloader to the other. Now, we've written this bootloader swapping program to be as robust as possible. It still could do with a bit more testing. But it's a very simple program, and it is in its simplicity that we hope that it will be robust, reliable, and effective for this purpose. Because if it were to fail about any time when it starts running, so what will happen is it will come up, you'll see the Infinitime logo again, but this time it will jump into the reloader application, and you'll see a pine cone. When you're looking at these things, whenever you see the Infinitime logo like that, that means you're running MCU boot. When you see a small white pine cone, that means you're running wasp bootloader. So in this case, we've seen the Infinitime logo, we're in MCU boot, and then it's going to jump over into a picture of a blue pine cone, which is the reloader application. And as the blue pine cone is slowly replaced by a white pine cone, you'll see the animation come up any second now. That will show you how you are progressing from one to the other. That's our blue pine cone just come up. And it's actually fairly quick, the process, once it's actually started running. So what it's doing there is it is just stepping up through that blue pine cone. When it turns white, the wasp bootloader will be in place, and we're ready to do phase 2, which is to install wasp-os itself. So about now, it'll be another sort of 5, 6, 7 seconds from that white pine cone to the reset. That's actually a watchdog timeout. And at this stage, it's now about to jump into the wasp bootloader. This is not a blue pine cone, this is a white pine cone, but the backlight has gone right down. Because the wasp bootloader sits here with the backlight on waiting for instructions, I set it to run at the least brightness possible. In fact, if I take the brightness down on the phone, the camera might start looking a little bit whiter on the other side. So that means we've changed our name. We're now going to be called PineDFU, so I'll connect to that. And again, it's the same process. I can use the over-the-air update programs. This is NRF Connect is the program that I'm using here. So now I can take MicroPython, which is the wasp-os main firmware binary. That also will transfer over the air. This will take a little bit longer than the previous one. So I'll probably cut out a section in the middle, and I will see you on the other side when that's finished downloading. So we're just getting up to about 90% now. So in a few seconds we will see the blue Bluetooth logo disappear, and we'll start switching into wasp-os itself. So it's now doing the wasp-os boot process. We'll see a little flash of main.py, and wasp-os is now running. We can see that sitting there. It's very useful here to have the battery meter, because the biggest risk when you are doing a upload of a different bootloader is that you run out of batteries partway through the upgrade process. If you do that, you can brick your device if it's a sealed one. So I don't recommend that. I will add some code to check the battery level in the reloader code at some point. But for now, I'm just going to do a reboot, and I just want to show you the last little bit, which is switching back to Infinitime. So again, it's just another zip update. I'll get the documentation out fairly shortly so you can see all the file names. But we're now using one called Reloader Factory because we're restoring the factory default firmware for the latest versions of the latest watches coming out of Pine64 are all now shipping with the Infinitime firmware from the factory. So if you want to do over-the-air updates, this is the mechanism you'll be using. So I have one called reloader.mcuboot.zip, which is how you switch over to the wasp bootloader. That's all the binaries I've shown you today are on the wasp-os continuous integration builds. So if you go to the wasp-os GitHub, click on Actions, you'll go to the artifacts, and in there you will find all the binaries that I've been using to copy things across reloader.mcuboot.zip, micropython.zip, and reloader-factory.zip. So this one I'm showing you now is reloader-factory.zip. It's putting the factory firmware back. Again, it's a relatively slow process. I will speak to you when we're nearly done. Okay, we're back at around 90%. So in a moment you're going to see the same boot process you see before. It's going to jump into that blue pine cone and start filling it up with white. And the program is actually the same. So wasp-reloader is actually the same code running in both cases, but in this case the payload is different. This is now copying different code onto the watch, but the program that's actually running to swap between the firmwares is exactly the same program in both cases. So as soon as that hits the top and we've got a full pine cone, you'll see the final reboot, you'll see the Infinitime logo. There will be a tiny little bit of corruption in the top corner of the screen here. That's because wasp-os wrote a file system over the MCU boot splash screen, so this little bit of white noise here is actually a file system. I do know how to fix that. I've got some code in process to allow us to write out a logo as part of the update process so that we can put back a nice logo before we jump into Infinitime. But that's all I particularly wanted to show you today. So that's returning over-the-air updates for all wasp-os users and to allow Infinitime and wasp-os users to swap back and forth, to explore other bits of software for the PineTime, which is every bit the point of the PineTime. I'm also really excited that this was also useful to JF and the Infinitime team as a way to upgrade the MCU bootloader in the field to have new features added to that bootloader. So that's all I want to show you. Thank you very much for listening.